Hey guys, currently reporting from the rec room where I'm going to go over 2 sessions I played last week on Hustler Casino Live. The first was for their All-Star game, which if you're not sure what that is, it's essentially just Hustler Casino Live's birthday that they celebrate every year, and they take all the players who played in the year, they open up a voting poll for them, and the top 9 players in the voting poll get to play the All-Star game. That doesn't always technically work out because some of the top 9 players are unavailable, but you guys get the idea. It's supposed to be fan favorites. Luckily this year I got voted in, so that gave me a chance to go over there and celebrate and play in their 25, 50, 100 game. The following day, it was Friday, and they had a high stakes game which I was also in. And across both of these games, there was a lot of money passed around. So without any results getting spoiled, let's jump straight into some poker hands. Alright guys, here we are once again playing some high stakes poker. All-Star game is underway. In the first interesting hand, I raise it up to $300 with Ace-Jack of Diamonds before Wesley makes it $1,500 in the small blind. Gets back to me, and with a hand like Ace-Jack suited, I'm definitely going to continue. Perhaps could re-raise once in a while, but with a playable hand like this, I decide to just call and go to a flop. Jack 9-6 with 1 diamond looks pretty good to me. We've got top pair, top kicker, and a backdoor flush draw. So when Wesley bets 2,500, I see no reason but to call, and we go to a turn card, which is the 5 of diamonds, giving me the nut flush draw. Not only that, but this should generally favor me more than him, so I'm not surprised to see Wesley check it. And now I decide to bet for value. I put in $3,000, and Wesley makes the call. River gives us some help. It's the deuce of diamonds. Truth be told, I'm not really sure we needed it since we have such a strong hand to begin with, but if he somehow is playing an overpair this way, we just got there. So when he checks it over for a second time, I am going to go for some value. I don't think betting huge makes a ton of sense, so I decide on half pot, $7,000. And Wesley snap calls with Queen Jack. A little bit surprised to see that. I thought maybe it would be a little more of a tough decision for him. Perhaps we could have got some more value, but either way, can't complain about making the nuts in the first hand we play. In this next hand, Andy straddles to 200, and then Mickey re-straddles to 600. Action gets to Charles on the button, and he opens up the action to $2,000 before I look down at Ace-10 of clubs from the third blind, which is the $100 blind. Against a button raise, I think Ace-10 suited performs best as a re-raise. Charles could be raising with all sorts of hands, so I make it $8,000 to go. Quite the big raise, but with the $600 straddle on in this hand, I guess it makes sense. Andy folds, but Mickey decides to defend his straddle with the old 6-5 unsuited. He calls my $8,000 raise, as does Charles. So we're going to go 3 ways out of position to a good flop. It's Ace, Jack, 4, Rainbow. There's no clubs out there, but we do have top pair, which is more often than not going to be the best hand. I decide to continue with a small bet. Could also be doing this with some bluffs like King, Queen, or perhaps Queen 10 suited, hands of that nature. Put in $6,000. Mickey gets out of the way, but Charles does not. He's got some backdoor potentials with the Jack out there and the Spade as well. Turn card is another good one. It's the King of Hearts. Generally going to be better for me than for my opponent, but with just top pair and a straight draw, I decide to pot control and check it over to Charles. Perhaps he'll bluff with a worse hand. Perhaps we're in bad shape against a flop 2 pair or even a set. So let's see what he wants to do. Charles checks it back, which has me feeling quite good about the hand. River card is the 4 of hearts. Again, could go for some thin value here, but I decide to check it and see what Charles wants to do. He does have a propensity to bluff. Looking back, I don't think this exact situation is one that he would be prone to bluffing in. Either way, though, I decide to check it. Charles checks it back with his 10 high, so it seems checking was probably the better play since he's not going to call with 10 high. And we end up winning this $36,000 pot. Off to a good start. In this next hand, we are once again going to be playing Ace-10 suited, this time the hearts variety. I raise it up to $300 before Andy kicks it up to $1,300 on my direct left. Action gets back to me, and against such a big raise, I think a call makes the most amount of sense. But once in a blue moon, mixing in re-raises with hands like ace 10 suited, I think is a good idea. Although I'll be the first to say that more often than not, a call is probably the best course of action. Anyway, I do raise it up this time. I make it 3,000 to go, and Andy just makes the call with ace king. We go to a flop, which is definitely above average. It's jack 8-2, all hearts, giving me what you call the nuts, the best possible hand. Pretty good flop for my hand for sure. Anyway, I decided to continue betting for 2,000. Could have gone a little bigger if I knew Andy's exact hand, as he's got 2 overs and the second nut flush draw. But it seems he does the job for me because he now raises to $8,300. I certainly thought that this raise was weird. I either expected him to just call or let it go. But of course, I've got a flush. What am I going to do, right? So I make the call, and we go to a turn card, which is not ideal. It's another 2. So now we are losing to hands like pocket jacks or pocket eights, but can't be scared of monsters under the bed. This time I check it since he raised on the flop, and interestingly enough, Andy now checks it back, so I'm really not too sure what Andy is up to in this hand. River card comes the queen of spades, and now we have a question between checking again or betting for some value. And I think a bet makes the most amount of sense since he checked back on the turn. If we were up against a full house, I'm sure he would have continued betting it on the turn. So we rate to have the best hand more often than not. And I do think he's got something because if he was bluffing, again, why would he check back on the turn? So I decided to target some hands that might raise the flop and check back the turn for pot control, like any jack, perhaps ace-8 suited, any sort of middling pair that he might rate to be the best hand. Anyway, I bet $6,000, which is around a quarter pot. And he thinks for a bit and lets it go. So kind of an underwhelming end to the hand, but always nice to get a little out of line pre-flop and hit a huge hand. Definitely running good so far. Let's see if we can keep it going with pocket threes. In this one, Andy opens up the action to 500. There's a few callers and I defend from the third blind. Flop comes down, perfect. 10-9-3 with 2 spades, giving me bottom set on a board where players are likely to have either some draws or top pair, maybe even 2 pair once in a while. So definitely looking to build this pot as quick as possible. I start with a check. Andy continues betting with his pocket jacks. He puts in $1,100. Mickey folds, and now Charles raises to 5,000. Action gets back to me, and well, let's be honest, it's kind of hard to mess up bottom set. He's probably not going to fold after making it 5,000, so putting in another raise, even though it seems kind of silly, I think makes total sense. So I make it 13,000 to go. If we were trying to play theoretically sound, I believe calling would be the better option, but in this particular hand, I'm just trying to get the money all in on the flop right now since I'm pretty sure we've got Charles in bad shape. Andy gets out of the way, and Charles wastes no time before announcing all in for his $40,000 or $50,000 stack. I, of course, call right away, and we agree to run it twice. He lets me know that he's got a draw, so hopefully we can hold against his ace-7 of spades. On the first run out, we end up making a full house, and on the second run out, we also make a full house. That is what you call running hot for sure, as Charles certainly had enough outs to probably get there at least on one board, but we get lucky, and he does not make a flush. We take down this nearly $100,000 pot. In the next hand, Professor opens to 400 before I make it 1,400 on the button with a premium hand, pocket queens. Andy thinks little of my re-raise as he makes it 5,200 from the small blind. It's back on me. I've got position and a very nice hand. I am going nowhere just yet. Could even re-raise once in a blue moon, but that might be a little bit of an overplay considering how deep we are. So I decide to just call, and we go heads up to a flop of Jack-Jack-7 with 2 hearts. Always a good flop for pocket queens when there's no ace or king out there, but still proceeding with a little bit of caution. Andy bets 4,200, and I call pretty quickly. Turn card is the 10 of spades. Interesting card, as it's probably a little bit better for me than for him, but I wouldn't be surprised if Andy was the type of player to continue betting an overpair on a board like this. So I am perhaps a little bit concerned if he continues betting, but of course I've got queens, can't go anywhere just yet, right? Turns out that won't happen though, because he now slows down and checks it over to me. Considering that this card is pretty good for me, and I've got a hand that we could get some value from worse holdings, I decide to put in a bet. We'll also be doing this with bluffs, such as perhaps a hand like 6-5 of spades, any heart draw like king, queen of hearts, for example. You guys get the idea. So betting with pocket queens, I think, makes sense. I put in $6,000, and Andy gives this bet quite a bit of thought before deciding to eventually call. River card comes the six of hearts, which introduces the flush. He checks it once more, and I'm not really sure if we can get value from a worse hand at this point. So despite having an overpair, I check it back, and we end up winning versus ace king high. A few rounds later, this hand comes up where there's another big straddle on somewhere at the table. Professor makes it 800 to go, and I look down at 10-7 of diamonds on the button. Not really strong enough to call, so I think the best play is to mostly fold and occasionally re-raise. That's what I do this time. I make it 3,000 to go. Suspect we're going to get some credit as I've been turning over good hands all day long. Professor is not convinced though. He makes the call, and we go to a flop of queen 10-8 rainbow. So we flopped middle pair on a board that's kind of neutral, probably a little bit better for him than me. So when he checks, even though I do have middle pair and could get behind a c-bet, I decide to check it back and see what happens on the turn, which is the 5 of spades. Probably going to call any reasonably sized bet, but Professor now bets more than double the size of the pot. He puts in $14,000. Kind of a tough spot with second pair. He could easily be bluffing with any sort of draw, or really any kind of airball that senses weakness on the flop and decides to start blasting. Second pair is ahead of all those potential hands, but at the same time, he could also have hands that have me in bad shape. Like, well, I don't have to list them all. Really anything better than a 10, and it's not hard to have something better than a 10 on a board like this. So after some thought, I decide that against such a big size, it's probably best if I let second pair go and just continue with the times that I have better hands. Luckily, this was the right decision this time as we were up against ace queen, but I remember feeling in the moment like I most likely got bluffed. Thankfully, that was not the case. Nice hand, Professor. And with that, we move to the second live stream here at Hustler on a Friday. Stakes are going to be big. Today, it's 100, 200 with a 200 big blind ante. And we're going to jump right in. In this first interesting hand, I raise up the action from early position to $500 with 8-6 of hearts. I get two callers before Pepe makes it 3,500 in the small blind. Professor folds, and now it's back on me. And let me be the first to say that with a hand like 8-6 suited, opening from early position and then calling a small blind re-raise is probably not the best idea. But we're pretty deep, and I like to give action in action games such as this one, so I do decide to call and see what happens. Mars also makes the call, so we're going to go three ways in between two of the other players to a flop of 9-7-6 with one heart. Interesting flop because it looks really good for me, but then upon closer inspection, it's not that amazing. We've only got bottom pair and an open-ended straight draw. We do also have a backdoor flush draw, so that's a little something. But all I know about this flop is that it should be a lot better for me than for Pepe. Mars is also in the hand, so that's a bit concerning. He could easily have hands that interact with this board, but as I've got removal to two pair, bottom set, and potential straights, with my exact holding, I think it's fair to say that Mars probably didn't connect too well on this flop, or at least, it seems a little bit unlikely. Pepe starts with a check, which, again, I think makes sense since this is a scary flop for an overpair, if that's what he's got. And now I decide to bet small, $3,600. Would also be doing this if I had hands like a set, two pair, flop straights, etc. Mars makes the call with his open-ender. And now Pepe does something really interesting and gives it some thought before check raising all the way up to $18,600. Kind of an odd play, I think, because he's putting himself in a tough spot. If I continue and Mars does as well, how can you really play an overpair on the turn now that the pot is so bloated? Do you just go with it and hope that you're ahead? Do you just check and give up? I don't really know, but I'm thinking it's going to be tough for him to win this hand considering how deep we are. So I decide to call, and Mars also makes the call. So we go to a turn card, which is the Jack of Hearts, and this pot is way bloated now. $67,000 in the middle. Pepe thinks it over for a bit and decides to check it. And I've got 63K behind. What do we do now that it's my turn? I've got an open-ender, I've got bottom pair, and of course a backdoor flush draw is now introduced with the Jack of Hearts. And I think the best play here is to jam all in. Again, like I said on the flop, if I had a set or a flop straight, maybe even two pair, I might decide to do this as well, considering that I've got less than a pot-sized bet behind. So balancing that out with some bluffs, such as the one I have in this case, seems rational to me. I announce all in for 63K. Mars lets go of his open-ender, and now Pepe is in a tough spot with his pocket tens. And that's kind of the whole problem of check-raising a board like this on the flop with an overpair. You're just not really sure where you're at on later streets. So I don't really blame Pepe for eventually folding his pocket tens. On this kind of board, it's almost never going to be the best hand. Luckily for me, he does let it go, and we take this one down with just bottom pair, technically speaking. Not bad. In the next fun hand, we are once again going to battle versus Pepe and Mars. In this hand, Pepe limps in for 200 before Professor makes it 800 to go. I'm next to act in late position with pocket sixes. Decided to just call and get instantly punished by Mars, who makes it 2600 on the button. Action gets around a Pepe, who decides to call the 2600. Professor also calls, and of course now I'm getting some ridiculous odds to come along, so that's what I do. And we flop a set on 9-8-6 with two spades. That is for sure an action flop. As you guys can see, Pepe has got himself two overcards and a flush draw. Professor, well, put an F in the chat for him. He didn't flop anything. I've got bottom set, and Mars has an open ender. There's going to be some action for sure, but maybe later because action checks all the way around on this flop. Turn card is the ace of diamonds, which now improves Mars to top pair, going along with his open-ended straight draw. Pepe and I still have essentially the same hands. Pepe checks again, Professor checks, and now I decide to bet small, $5,500, right around a third the size of the pot. Mars thinks for a bit and calls the 5,500, and now Pepe springs into action with a check raise. $21,000 to go. Professor finally gets to release his 4 high, so that's good for him. Now it's on me, and what do we do here? Well, if Pepe's got a hand like 10-7 suited or 7-5 suited, of course pocket 8s, pocket 9s, all these sorts of hands that have me beat, well, we probably don't want to get it all in against those hands. And if he's bluffing with some sort of draw like the one he has here, then we also don't want to get all in against those hands because it gives him an opportunity to fold. So whether we're in trouble or not, I think the best course of action is to call in position and allow him to continue betting with whatever he's got. Mars thinks for a bit and makes a disciplined fold with his top pair. So this time it's just the two of us going to a river, which is a good one. It's the 9 of clubs, giving me a full house. So now if Pepe was springing a trap with a straight, we now improve. Of course, if we're up against pocket 9s or pocket 8s, then congratulations, Pepe, you get all the money. But hopefully he's got either a straight or maybe even a hand like ace X of spades that might occasionally get a little feisty on the turn. This time he thinks for a while and decides to check it. That kind of sucks. I was hoping he would bet. Seems I'll have to do my own betting though. In terms of sizing, our bet here would represent either a very strong hand or really just a bluff, so I think a big size makes the most amount of sense. After giving it some thought, I bet nearly the size of the pot, but Pepe's got king high and lets it go right away. Still, we do profit nearly $35,000 in this hand. The second day is going just as smoothly as the first one. Let's see if we can continue on that trend. In the following hand, take a guess who we're going to be going up against. Yep, that's right. It's Pepe once more. For whatever reason, the deck is giving us some playable hands today. Here we go. In this one, he straddles to $400 from late position. I believe he was just coming back from the restroom or something and decided to post the straddle. Either way, $400 straddle from him, and I look down at ace-10 of diamonds in the cutoff. I raise it up to 1,000. Andy calls from the big blind with pocket 8s, and now Pepe re-raises to 3,000. Interesting raise from him. Whether he's got a good hand or not, it seems a little bit small for the raise size. Considering I made it 1,000 and Andy called, I suspected he'd go a little bit bigger. So I decided to attack what I think is some weakness and make it $8,000 to go. Probably have the best hand, and if not, we've got position, could navigate post-flop and find a way to win more often than not, I think. So I make it 8,000 to go. Andy lets go of his pocket 8s. Pepe does not let go of his 6 high. So we go to a flop of ace, 8, 7 with 2 spades out there. Thank goodness Andy got out of the way as he would have flopped a set versus my top pair. Pepe checks, and I decide to check it back, which is a little bit unorthodox, but if I always bet top pair and check when I don't have top pair, you can see how that becomes a little bit predictable. So occasionally checking back top pair for deception seems like a good idea to me. Turn card is the deuce of spades, bringing in a potential flush. Pepe checks, and once again, I decide to lay in the weeds and check it back. River card is the ace of hearts. Pepe now bets $5,000, and almost always I am going to have the best hand. For that reason, I think a raise makes perfect sense, but I decided to just call and keep it chill. He probably wasn't going to call a raise with bottom pair 6 kicker anyway. So yeah, this hand isn't anything monumental, but what I do think is worth noting is I ran extremely hot in this hand in the sense that Pepe decided to re-raise with 6 deuce of diamonds, which gave me the opportunity to raise again with ace 10. If Pepe decides to just call or fold pre-flop, then I end up going to a flop with Andy as well, who would have flopped a set of 8s and rivered a full house just as I make 3 of a kind. So yeah, poker is weird like that. The randomness of it all can sometimes lead to you winning huge pots, or in this case, prevent you from losing a giant pot as well. Later on, this hand comes up where the $400 straddle is on. Andy raises to 1,000 from the hijack. Professor calls in the small blind, and I look down at 6-5 suited in the big blind. I think calling is totally fine, but if I'm always re-raising hands like aces, kings, queens, ace, king, the strong stuff, then I think also re-raising some suited connectors like these makes sense, just so it's not always predictable what I'm holding when I do put in a raise pre-flop. This is going to be one of those times. I make it $6,500 to go. Andy thinks for a bit and folds, but Professor comes along once again from the small blind. We go heads up to a flop of king, queen, 8, 2 clubs, and 1 diamond. Of course, I've got absolutely nothing, just 6 high, no potential anything really aside from, I guess, a backdoor straight. But that being said, this is a board that should favor me heavily, as I did put in a re-raise pre-flop. So when Professor checks, I continue betting for a small size, just like I would with all my hands. I make it 5,000, and he makes the fold with pocket 3s. So a pretty standard hand, but we do take down nearly $8,000 in this one without much resistance. In the following hand, Wes opens up the action to 500 from early position. Andy makes the call, Mike X makes the call, and then I look down at ace king in the small blind. I'm going to go for another raise. Last time it was 6 high. This time I've got it. I make it $4,000 to go. And what do you know? All 3 players make the call. So we're going to go 4 ways to a flop with over 16,000 in the middle, which comes 3-3 deuce. Pretty dry flop. I don't think anyone's going to connect with this board much at all. I do have the ace of spades, which might allow me to represent flushes later in the hand. So even though I'm not really a huge proponent of bluffing with ace king exactly, I think this is a good opportunity to do it, since even if someone's holding on with an overpair, like anything bigger than pocket 4s but smaller than pocket jacks, it's going to be really tough for them across multiple streets, I think. And of course, any overcard could come that might help me, or perhaps I could represent like a queen. So anyway, I decided to continue with a small bet. I make it $3,500 to go. Wesley makes the call and the other 2 players fold. Now, I'm noticing that Wesley made the call with Andy and Mike X left to act, which is generally going to be stronger than if he had called last to act. I think that means he's got at least a hand like pocket 5s, probably something stronger like 8s or 9s, or, 10s like he happens to have here. So yeah, I'm fully aware that I need some help, but I'm honestly going to keep applying pressure whether it comes or not, because I can easily have aces or kings, whereas Wesley really can't, given that he didn't put in another raise pre-flop. But it turns out none of that analysis will really come into play here, because we turn a king. That's right, the king of clubs out of nowhere, giving me what I most likely assume is the best hand almost always. And now it's a question of, do we want to check or do we want to continue betting? Well, the pot is right around 23,000 and my man Wesley has 22,000 behind. So essentially just a pot-sized bet. And I think the best play here is to jam all in. If I had any sort of bluff, like any suited ace that didn't pair up, maybe a hand like 6-5 suited once again, you guys get the idea. These sorts of out-of-line pre-flop raises that decide to continue bluffing the flop. I would definitely want to be jamming all in, using this king as a scare card. So I think doing it when I actually have it is just the best approach. Wesley does seem suspicious of this all in because he thinks about it for quite a long time before eventually folding. That's right, Wesley makes the right decision. Good play from him, and we don't get the maximum, but still can't complain about winning with ace-king versus pocket 10s. Anyway, that was the last interesting hand of this High Stakes Friday. As always, I hope you all enjoyed the hands. Right, so as you guys saw, things went pretty well for myself. I ended up winning over $200,000 across those 2 days, which of course is a very, very nice result. But not only that, I was actually happy with the way I played both of those sessions, and that's not something I can often say. So that's another win in and of itself, at least for me personally. Either way, I hope you guys enjoyed the hands, and I also wanted to say thank you to anyone out there who potentially voted for me in the All-Star game that gave me a chance to play, which was a lot of fun. Fingers crossed that I can make it next year as well. But yeah, needless to say, this was a very positive result. It was at a very welcome time because I've been on a little bit of a break-even / downswing stretch for like the last few months. So yeah, maybe this is a sign of upward trending to come. But yeah, that's all I got for you guys. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, good luck at your local tables. Peace.